Welcome to Murder Mile UK True Crime. This isn't a video, it's an audio experience. The only images you'll need for this episode are these. So close your eyes, open your mind, and savour the sounds of Murder Mile. Is anyone safe behind the locked door of a London guest house? Find out on Murder Mile. Today, I'm standing on Eagle Street in Holborn, WC2. 3 streets northwest of the mysterious falling man. 2 streets east of the slaughtered spinster. 2 streets south of Jean Stafford, possibly one of Reg Christie's early victims. And 1 street west of the mad axe-wielding Baker. Coming soon to Murder Mile. Situated just off High Holborn and above a pub called the Bountiful Cow, sits Beckley, a nondescript 6-storey block of flats on the corner of 47 to 51 Eagle Street with a side entrance on Dane Street. Built to fit a gap on a side road full of offices, it's the kind of communal building where its neighbours only communicate with a grunt in the hallway, an awkward silence in the lift, a bang on the ceiling when the music gets too loud, and they only ever learn each other's names when a court summons comes through for stealing each other's Amazon parcels. And like so many city centre flats, one was originally rented out to tourists to help the owner cover its costs. From the end of October to the start of December 2001, an unspecified 2-roomed, 2nd-floor flat was a warm and welcoming guest house with its bedroom rented out at several times to 2 female Korean students exploring London's history, culture and art. As strangers in a notoriously dangerous city, they did everything right to ensure their safety, as London isn't for the faint of heart. And although they stayed within the confines of their tight-knit community, the sadistic killer was hiding in plain sight. My name is Michael, I'm your tour guide, and this is Murder Mile. Episode 338, Death by Gilbert and George. Hyun-Han Jin, names which mean virtuous and precious, was a 21-year-old South Korean woman who was raised with her brother, In-Hea, by her doting parents in a village 40 miles south of the capital city of Seoul. Comprising of farmland and small industry, from an early age, Hyun-Han always wanted to see the world. Even if being tiny, at 4 foot 11 inches tall and fresh-faced, she was often mistaken for a child. Just shy of the new millennium, having gained her mother's permission, which was something Hyun-Han always did as a well-mannered and diligent daughter, she flew to the University of Lyon in France to study French. And knowing they would always worry about her, she kept in regular contact with her family. By the half-term of October 2001, with a few days to spare to see the sights of London, Hyun-Han got approval from her mother, who said, "Wherever you go, make sure you enjoy it. Don't have any regrets." As every experience would make her daughter a better woman, only this was one she would regret. On Friday the 26th of October, she got the Eurostar from Paris to St. Pancras. Within 6 hours, Hyun-Han was wheeling her rigid grey and silver suitcase onto the Piccadilly line tube. And with her case 50 centimetres wide by 29 centimetres thick and 72 centimetres high, she'd packed just enough clothes for 3 days, as she planned to be back in Lyon by Sunday. Over a brief glimpse of London, she told her friends, the city was overwhelming, and often described as a culture shock to outsiders, as it's awash with both the new and the ancient, the clean and the filthy, and every side is obsessed with its dark history of war, death, disease, torture, and executions. As a small lone girl in a big bad city, she wisely stayed within the bubble of London's South Korean community. At 7 p.m, she exited Holborn Tube, took a 7-minute, well-lit walk down High Holborn, and passing a string of Korean restaurants and shops full of familiar faces and smells, On Eagle Street, she checked into a guest house at Beckley. It was recommended by her friends, as hundreds of Korean students had stayed there before, and with Hyun-Han in the spare bedroom, the landlord, 29-year-old Kye, a student from Seoul, had the other room which he used to share with his girlfriend Mariko, who often stayed over. It was small, clean, and safe. The communal door was opened by a keypad, and the flat itself had its own key, as did her bedroom. And with Kye being friendly and helpful by showing her the sights, she had drawn up a list of places to visit and had emailed her mother to reassure her, "I have met a kind new friend." She wasn't in England long enough to have made an enemy. As far as we know, her death wouldn't be discovered for weeks, and the crime scene itself wouldn't be unearthed for months. There were no signs of any break-in, no threats against her, no stalker, no strange calls, and she hadn't spoken of any worries to her friends and family. And with no other lodgers, it was mostly just Hyun-Han and Kye in the guest house. She had done everything right to ensure her safety. Or so she thought. At an unspecified hour, unwittingly, Hyun-Han unlocked the bedroom door from the inside to let her killer in. Dressed in just jeans, a t-shirt, her underwear, and a pair of socks but no trainers. She wasn't ready for bed, but neither was she going out, and it was likely to be late as we know she wasn't a night owl. Neighbours heard no shouts, screams, and nothing suspicious was seen, so we can't pin to an exact time or day to her murder. And as this dot of a woman was easily overpowered, she sustained no cuts. There were no signs of a struggle, but her bruises may have been obscured by her severe decomposition. Months later, when this crime scene was finally unearthed, even after several students had stayed over and the room, as expected, was thoroughly cleaned after every use, forensic scientist Sarah Gray found a faint spatter of Hyun-Han's blood by the door and a white wooden desk, staining the brown carpet, the white skirting board, and the dark blue wall. She stated, "I concluded the presence of spots of blood, which gave a strong support that she'd been bleeding freely whilst on the floor of that room, possibly deposited on different occasions, was from contact with blood-stained surfaces, like a hand. With no marks, it's likely that she bled from her nose, having been punched to render her unconscious." But it wasn't this which took her life, as her cruel killer's plan was far more dark and sinister and evil. While she was unconscious, he stripped her of all but her bra, and yet sex didn't seem to have been his motive, as her autopsy confirmed that she hadn't been raped or molested, as this was about degradation and humiliation. With a thick reel of dark blue packing tape emblazoned with a brightly coloured cartoon of two men's faces, he tightly bound her wrists and ankles so that no matter what she couldn't flee or resist. As she came to, he stuffed her socks into her mouth, not only to silence her, but having also wound the tape around her head to hold the gag in place, he stretched it over her nostrils so that she couldn't breathe. Gasping for air and pleading with terrified eyes as a faint squeak squealed from her throat. With the tape on, she would slowly suffocate. With it off, she gulped great gasps of air, and whether she lived or died would be dictated by him. Dangling the prospect of death before her, over a protracted torture, he extracted her PIN number, went to the Sainsbury's ATM by Hope and Tube, and withdrew the daily limit of her limited funds that she had. But as Jonathan Laidlaw, QC for the prosecution, stated, "Was there a sexual motive? Was it simply about money? Or a more sinister possibility is that he achieved a sadistic form of pleasure from the slow and deliberate form of killing and sex, and money was simply incidental." She believed she had given him what he wanted, money. But what he wanted was to humiliate and degrade this tiny helpless woman, and to watch her die, slowly and in pain. without a fresh supply of oxygen in her bloodstream, she would have lost consciousness in 5 to 10 seconds. Her face and lips would have turned a hideous purpley blue. Oxygen deprivation would have resulted in brain damage in 2 minutes, and her death within 4. But that's only if the sadist took her to the brink of death just once. As a small and slender woman, still bound and gagged, he folded her tiny body into a fetal position, stuffed her inside her own grey and silver suitcase, which he'd stripped of any ID or possessions, and hid it inside of the sliding wardrobe, flat on the floor, so the rubber supports left little marks on the carpet. Hiring a Peugeot 406 from Avis Car Rental, a few streets over, he pulled up outside the flat, and as if he was going on holiday, he loaded the suitcase into the boot and drove 202 miles north, up the M1, past Sheffield and Leeds, and taking the A64 nearly to York, just south of the village of Askham Richard, on an isolated, unnamed country road, surrounded by nothing but fields. He dumped the suitcase in the hedge and left. And there it sat for 2 weeks, in the shadow of the Bilborough TV mast and Stockhill cottages. But as a slew of cars and dog walkers passed, everyone just assumed, as the killer thought, it was just rubbish. One day prior, on Monday the 29th of October, her classmates thought it odd that she hadn't returned to university. And with no contact with her friends or family, her brother In-Hea had posted appeals online for sightings of her amongst the 200-strong Korean community in London and officially reported her missing. Seeing this, her killer initially told her distraught mother that she was spotted on the 17th of November at London's Victoria Coach Station, heading to York with 3 friends. And cruelly giving her hope, he gave Hyun-Han's bank card to a friend who was heading to Paris and told them to drain the account. Everything would point to Hyun-Han fleeing abroad and wanting to be left alone, until her badly decomposed body was discovered. On Sunday the 18th of November, just after 4 p.m, a local heading to the pub spotted a suitcase in a hedge, and with fluid leaking out, a foul smell emanating, and with it too heavy to lift, he contacted the police. Examined in the mortuary of York Hospital, the body was in an advanced state of decay. The skin had begun to slough off and the muscles to liquefy. Bloated and infested with maggots, the blackened skin made it impossible to see any bruising, but with her wrists and ankles still bound by a colourful parcel tape wrapped from her chin to just under her red and protruding eyes, it was clear that this was a murder. Detective Chief Inspector Alan Ankers appealed for information based on the vague details that he had.
She was a woman of Asian or Oriental origin, 4 foot 11.5 inches tall, aged somewhere between 20 and 40. She was slender, with brown eyes and shoulder-length black hair. She had pierced ears but wasn't wearing any studs and wore contact lenses.
But with no tattoos, scars or ID, and with her fingerprints not on the police or immigration databases, it was highly unlikely they would ever identify her, having been dumped so far from home. Pathologist Professor Christopher Milroy stated that the way she'd been bound and asphyxiated,
I've only seen that done once, during a professional presentation in America.
So they knew it couldn't be linked to any British killer. One witness stated he saw a man on the date near to where the body was dumped, 15 metres from the suitcase and 20 metres from the junction of York Road, where a dark-coloured saloon was parked. He said he saw a man in the middle of the road.
I find it strange that someone was in the lane at that time of the morning.
He was described as
white, late 30s to early 40s, 6 foot tall, with dark brown scruffy hair and a heavy stubble, wearing a black ski-type jacket, dark jeans or trousers, and black gloves.
It was an excellent description of a Hyun-Han's killer, with just one exception. He wasn't white. As for the brightly coloured parcel tape he used to bind and gag her, That was from a limited edition set of 850 rolls, produced exclusively for the Tate Gallery shops in London, Liverpool and Cornwall. It was a reproduction of a piece of art called Death, Hope, Life and Fear by conceptual artists Gilbert and George. This was something so unique, it should have snared a killer within days. But with so many months having passed, most of the transactions by cash, and the CCTV long since erased, the case was crumbling, and all the detectives knew was that she was an unknown woman from somewhere who died somehow by someone. The evidence had reached a dead end, and what they needed was a bit of luck. Superintendent Lim Byung-ho was a South Korean police officer who was studying criminal justice at Leeds University. Having read the report on the body in the suitcase, the appeal by Hyun-Han's brother, and with every South Korean required to provide their fingerprints for their social security cards, by the 2nd of January 2002, 45 days after the body was found, she was identified as Hyun-Han Jin. With her name, they had her bank details, and except for an erroneous transaction in Paris, which had occurred days after the pathology confirmed that she was already dead, her phone data concluded it was switched off on Saturday the 27th of October, and it had been pinging the cell masts around Holborn. Keen to trace her movements, DCI anchors came to London with the aim of catching a killer, unaware that another body was lying motionless, bound and cold. Similar to Hyun-Han, In-Hea Song, a name meaning grace and longevity, was a 22-year-old South Korean woman who'd come to London to study hotel management at Guildhall University. As one of two children to a doting mother and a retired policeman, she was outgoing, popular, and described as a model daughter. But having struggled financially, she'd quit a course and was looking for work. Again, staying within the safety of her tight-knit community, in late November 2001, she stayed at a recommended guest house owned by a close friend on Eagle Street in Holborn, the same room where Hyun-Han had been brutally murdered just 3 weeks before. But needing somewhere cheaper to stay, the landlord offered his friend a spare room at the property where his girlfriend had previously lived, a maisonette on the Lansbury Estate in Poplar, East London. Hyun-Han and In-Hea never knew each other, and they'd never met. But they'd crossed paths in a very deadly way. Kye Soo Kim, his first name, which bizarrely means model citizen, was a 29-year-old South Korean man who'd come to England 1 year before to study English at the Callum Language School on Oxford Street. Kye was well liked, popular, kind and charming, and having a fairly conventional middle-class upbringing, with his father running a herbal medicine shop in Seoul. Having divorced his wife, Kye had travelled across Europe, Southeast Asia, Canada, and for the last year at least, he'd lived in London. Being smart, he'd funded himself by subletting his spare rooms, one on Eagle Street in Holborn and Augusta Street in Poplar, to South Korean students. And being cheap, clean and safe, it proved popular. Every tenant who stayed at his guest house said he was handsome, charming, very helpful, and as strangers in a city full of danger, he was the one person that they knew they could rely on. But even though he had no criminal record in the UK, Kye was not what he seemed. He professed to be generous to a fault, when in truth, he was broke, having amassed £17,000 in debt in a single year. He also gave the impression to the girls who stayed with him that he was unthreatening, with In-Hea even telling her parents, "We were like a brother and sister." But all the while, his head was riddled with a deadly addiction. It wasn't drink or drugs, but porn. Hardcore porn involving bondage, sadomasochism, strangulation, pain, and the degradation and humiliation of women, and an obsession with her long and lingering deaths. By day, he was charm personified. By night, a perverted danger to women. By September 2001, barely a few months after they had got together, Mariko, his girlfriend, split with him just weeks before the killings began. She packed her bags and left the guest house in Poplar, leaving behind a half-used roll of parcel tape. Limited edition and brightly coloured, made for the tape gallery shops by artists Gilbert and George. It became a key part of his cruel fantasy and a crucial piece of the evidence. In-Hea Song had stayed at the guest house on the Lansbury Estate for little over a week. It was quiet, cheap, and the kind of 6-story block of 1960s flats where everyone minded their own business. Nobody saw her move in. Nobody knew her name. Few people knew him, and nobody saw her leave. Saturday the 8th of December 2001 would have been a typical evening for In-Hea. As being short on cash, she wasn't dressed to go out. There would be no sign of a break-in, as her killer had his own key, being her landlord. She willingly let him in, as being a close friend, her bedroom door was always open. And as someone she trusted, he overpowered her with a single punch, knocking her cold and out of the blue. As before, being semi-clad, he bound her wrists and ankles with packing tape so she couldn't flee, stuffing her socks into her mouth so she couldn't cry or scream, and winding the tape around her head so tight that her eyes bulged out. With a flap over her nostrils, only he could decree if she lived or died. Living out his dark fantasy for a second time, having tortured her to obtain her PIN number, and leaving her bound and barely able to breathe as he drained her bank account at the nearest ATM. She must have had a faint hope that maybe he would let her live, having given him what he wanted: money. But as the tape cut into her flesh and a bloody froth gasped around the air holes, he watched as he subjected her to a long and lingering death. Unlike Hyun-Han, as a free spirit who'd lived in London for almost 2 years, In-Hea's family were used to hearing from her intermittently, and no longer being at university, she wasn't reported missing for 10 days. As before, her empty bank account and switched off phone told a story of a woman who'd fled and didn't want to be found by anyone. Kye told her friends the believable tale that she'd gone on a hotel management course, but didn't say where. And having told the same lie to her mother, he gave her the false hope that her daughter was alive and well, when in truth, he knew she was cold and dead. With the body of Hyun-Han found in a suitcase 3 weeks before, knowing it wouldn't be long before the detectives found the one thing which connected them, the guest houses, Kye used her credit card at a travel agent's, and on Thursday the 13th of December 2001, at Heathrow Airport, he fled to Toronto. And there, as someone who for many years had lived off-grid and anonymously, making a living cash in hand and blending in amongst the Korean community overseas, he may never have been found. With Hyun-Han's fingerprints leading to our identification, DCI anchor of North Yorkshire Police came to London, and having met with his Met Police counterpart, DCI Vic Ray, they unearthed an unnerving parallel. Hyun-Han Jin, a young female South Korean student, had vanished without a trace. Her phone was off, her bank account emptied, and a trail of clues suggested she'd fled overseas, which later proved to be false when her body was found gagged, bound, and suffocated. DCI Ray had just been handed a missing persons inquiry into In-Hea Song, a young female South Korean student who'd vanished in a similar way. But were they connected? Escalated to the Met Police's murder command, Detective Superintendent Peter Shipp would oversee both inquiries, and together with North Yorkshire Police, on the 8th of January 2002, they established a joint investigation into the murder of Hyun-Han Jin and the disappearance of In-Hea Song, stating,
"We identified him early on. He was the main link between the girls, and both stayed at Eagle Street."
His phone records showed that he'd travelled to and from the village of Askham Richard, where the body was dumped, on the night that he dumped it. Tracing his bank account, a Peugeot 406 had been hired from Avis. The car's logbook matched the distance. Hyun-Han's blood was found in the boot, having leaked from a suitcase, and the rubber supports on its underside matched those which had marked the boot's carpet. Establishing that he left the country just 5 days before In-Hea was reported missing, both of his guest houses were searched. At the maisonette on the Lansbury Estate in Poplar, her DNA and traces of her blood was found in the bedroom. And although none of her possessions remained, on a black metal shelf, the roll of Gilbert and George tape was found with Kye's fingerprints and In-Hea's blood. Indisputable proof. But where was the body? He hadn't hired another car. He hadn't travelled outside of London. No one had seen him wheeling a suitcase out of the flat. And having checked the flat twice, forensics confirmed it wasn't there. In the Eagle Street flat, although an extensive clean-up had taken place and several students had lived there in the 3 months since, Hyun-Han's blood was found on the skirting board and the same rubber marks on the wardrobe's carpet where the body in the suitcase had sat, while Kye worked out where to dump it. But again, where was the other body? It had vanished without a trace. On Thursday the 17th of January 2002, for reasons only Kye knows, he flew back to London Heathrow, his passport pinged up on the police radar. They tracked him to an internet cafe on Oxford Street, and that day he was arrested. Interviewed at Western Central Police Station, he was described as cold, calculating, and even when faced with the overwhelming evidence against him, via an interpreter, the only words he spoke was no comment. They charged him with the murder of Hyun-Han Jin and suspicion of the murder of In-Hea Song. But without her body, in the same way he had tortured these girls for his own sexual gratification, he got a sadistic pleasure by denying In-Hea's family a chance to grieve their dead daughter and to bury her with dignity. But sometimes, evidence will only emerge at its own speed. On Friday the 15th of March 2002, 3 months after her murder, with the maisonette on the Lansbury Estate in Poplar sold to new owners, a builder was renovating the flat when he spotted a familiar hum. A swarm of bluebottles, one of the first insects to be attracted by the smell of decaying flesh into which it lays its eggs and its maggots feed, coming out of a wooden panel underneath the bath. Removing it, he couldn't see anything, but he saw that they were coming from a hole where a foul odour emanated. The police had already searched the flat twice, but it was as the spring temperatures caused the maggots to feast and the eggs to hatch as their winter hibernation ended, that the body could be found. Beside the front door, in a small, unused wall cavity made of bricks and breeze blocks, Kye had dumped her semi-clad and bound body, wrapping her in a duvet, covering it in her clothes, and replacing the partition wall using a masking gun. He had sealed it up so the smell wouldn't permeate, at least until spring. On Tuesday the 4th of March 2003, before Judge Jeremy Roberts, Kye Soo Kim was tried at the Old Bailey. On the first day, he denied all charges of murder. On the second, he confessed to killing Hyun-Han, yet he claimed that In-Hea's death was due to the lesser charge of manslaughter owing to a sex game gone wrong. But as Jonathan Laidlaw, QC for the prosecution, stated, "There are circumstances where we would accept a manslaughter plea. This is not one of those cases. and the judge agreed. Giving no evidence at his own trial, Kye's motive could only be guessed. Was it about money, sex, or the humiliation and degradation of women? And with the deliberation delayed as one of the jury felt sick at hearing the evidence, on Tuesday the 25th of March 2003, they reached a verdict on the murders. Guilty. Handed 2 life sentences with a minimum of 25 years, he'll be eligible for parole next year. Summing up, Judge Roberts described his crimes as exceptionally wicked.
You snuffed out the lives of 2 innocent young girls who trusted you and believed you were their friend. You did that in a way which must have been exceptionally distressing to them and caused untold misery and anxiety for their families.
And although a sadistic and perverted killer was locked up, another mystery remained. Having travelled extensively across Europe, Southeast Asia and Canada for the last decade, Kye Soo Kim only came to the UK in September 2000. He had lived here for just 1 year, and in that time he committed 2 brutal and horrific murders. So why did he start? And were these his first murders? Detective Superintendent Shipp stated,
"My concern is that he committed 2 offences, very similar in nature, within a very short period of time. I'm fairly confident he has not claimed other lives in the United Kingdom. I cannot rule out that he hasn't committed offences elsewhere. It is a concern, and we have linked with other law enforcement agencies, but it is not for us to say how far these investigations go."
Kye Soo Kim has never given a statement as to whether he has committed any earlier murders.